happen. We have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And in the news this week, good news from Anchorage, Alaska, where the voters there rejected an assault on transgender rights.
In fact, anti-LGBT legislation is failing in most state legislatures, and we're making some advances.
Mike Pompeo is up for Secretary of State. The hearings are this week, and 55 civil rights groups have come out against his nomination.
We were fascinated to read this week about the cabinet secretaries attending a weekly Bible study group, joining Vice President Pence and an extremely right-wing pastor.
I noticed that Trump wasn't a member of it. A federal legal win in Texas for transgender people that doesn't help the individual plaintiff.
Yeah, the new Medicare cards that are slowly being issued across the country will have no gender marker, a breakthrough for trans older people.
Probably inadvertent on the part of this government, but yes.
You'll have to write in your own as you get it.
We mourn the loss of Hawaii's former U.S. Senator Daniel Akaka.
But we're excited to tell you about LGBT people in Swaziland and in Trinidad and Tobago who are stepping out bravely for their rights.
Okay. Well, where should we start? Should we start with Anchorage, or should we start with the fact that maybe we're having a war because the president's lawyers were?
I think we'll let that take care of itself, and we'll start in Alaska.
Okay. Well, the voters there, they passed in 2015, they passed a law protecting LGBT rights, including transgender rights. And so the right wing wanted to have this on the ballot, put it on the ballot. And it was a hard-fought race over Prop 1. And the vote was 53% to 47% to keep the law, including Senator Murkowski.
Senator Lisa Murkowski, who was one of the 3 Republican votes in the Senate against the attempt to destroy Obamacare, came through in her local election in Anchorage, Alaska, and voted for keeping trans rights.
Now, the group Fair Anchorage raised $800,000, actually a lot more money than the opponents of transgender rights raised. And this is the first time that a ballot initiative trying to force people to use restrooms based on their, quote, anatomy and genetics at the time of birth. Good grief. Was first time we won one of those things. And we've lost these things in the past.
Houston was the big loss.
The tactics were different this time. People learned from the past losses. And when they went after us, as they usually do, we're going to show you the kinds of ads that they ran.
Our side has been very tongue-tied about this. Certainly trans rights in the history of the world is a very recent subject of discussion, and even more recently of legislation. And we are only slowly figuring out how to discuss these issues, and particularly with the help of trans people who speak up for themselves and become visible. And that is one of the lessons that is slowly being learned and was put into use in this election.
But in other words, our side putting transgender people front and center, but the other side is using the same old tactics. And we're going to show you that one of the ads that they ran there to try to defeat transgender rights there.
The right-wing ad.
I was in the locker room, and there was this man watching the women shower. The staff said, "This person identifies as a female. You are the one with the problem." Predatory men are using these laws to violate women.
Proposition 1 protects everyone's privacy. Vote yes on 1 and mail in your ballot today. Paid for by Yes on 1. Protect our privacy. Top 3 contributors: Alaska Family Action, Family Policy Alliance, and American Family Association.
Violating the privacy of women is discrimination.
I think she witnessed that.
Well, it's a total lie, and it's enraging that she would, as an actress, I assume, assert this about predatory men in the locker room to attack women. That a total lie.
And it's the same
Total
thing
lie.
they say about restrooms. Men are going to go into the little girls' room and get your little daughters.
Yes. Absolute lies, absolute fear-mongering. And to what end, I might ask? To what end?
Well, it's obviously, for these right-wing Christians especially, who are the people who mount this, and the Pope, I mean, they see this as the threat to the undermining of Western civilization. They call it gender ideology, and they are fighting it tooth and nail.
You know, I am an old-fashioned lady.
Okay.
Very old. And, but I can understand these things. What's their problem?
Well, you have had the advantage of working within the community
I
and being
certainly
educated.
have.
Look,
I appreciate that.
I mean, I grew up in a fairly conservative Long Island, middle class setting. When I first came into the gay movement, and I would talk about what girls do and things like that, women educated me right then and there in 1975. Why that was wrong, and I was like, and that they taught me, and I learned, and
I have benefited from your education of him, so thank you for that.
We need it.
But my point being that I really don't get the motivation here other than a desire to return to the caves of old. Meanwhile, the more progressive and enlightened side, as I would characterize us, put out countervailing ads that were much more appealing and much more truthful. So let's
put transgender people front and center.
Exactly. Thus,
like most parents, I care deeply about my family. That includes taking care of our transgender son, Cole. Like the rest of us, Cole sometimes needs to use public restrooms, and we want him to be safe just like everyone else.
I'm scared that if Proposition 1 passes, I would be bullied and harassed and forced to use the girls' restroom at school.
That's why I'm voting no on Proposition 1.
To protect teens in Anchorage like me.
Paid for by Fair Anchorage, No One Prop 1. Top 3 contributors are Freedom for All Americans, ACLU of Alaska, and Human Rights Campaign.
They seem like much nicer people than that other woman.
I think it's so cool of Cole to be willing to appear on camera and speak and be visible. Very, very terrific.
And they ran ads from lots of Native people in Alaska who stood up and talked about this as prejudice that we are not for in Alaska. It was really moving.
Well, and when the voters can see the reality of people and be able to get through the fear-mongering and see the truth of who these people are and what their lives are like and how they have supportive families and friends and all of that, then it becomes much easier and clearer. So at any rate, the voters defeated the proposed repeal of the Gender Non-Discrimination Act that still stands now in Anchorage, Alaska, and whose campaign can now serve as a model for everywhere.
Yes.
But of course, we have many non-discrimination laws that have been adopted by city councils and states and whatever. So this was just the particular case of the voters.
And we have to watch out for conservative state legislatures that then try to preempt the localities when they do protections.
All right.
Because then they don't believe in local control.
Well, let's go to the Trump administration, and then we can go back to what's going on in the states. All right, so Mike Pompeo has been nominated for Secretary of State, and he is a tough guy, right-winger there on the left.
Anti-LGBT, very anti-Muslim, has called those who torture patriots. It's really grotesque. And so 55 civil rights groups lined up, including a lot of LGBT groups, lined up to oppose his nomination, which is being heard this week. I heard he was consulting with all the secretaries of state, former secretaries, including Hillary Clinton.
Wow.
But, HRC, National LGBT Task Force Action Fund, PFLAG, National Center for Transgender Equality, Matthew Shepard Foundation, Housing Works, all these groups have signed on to this letter to say, please, no, this is not America.
Well, they're not going to get very far with that, but when this guy was a congressman from Kansas, he certainly voted against everything we care about and was outspoken in his views. And the problem here is that as the Secretary of State, he is in charge of how the United States presents itself and its point of view around the world. And we have benefited in the last 8 years and before from an attitude from the top in the U.S. government that said we support LGBT rights around the world, and we will support local communities, and we will support diversity.
Our embassies run pride events.
Yes.
For the locals.
Yes. And all of that is going to be lost with Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State. So this is an important position.
And he's part of the Bible study group.
Is he?
Yes, he is.
Yes, I'm sure he is.
He is part of the Bible study group in the White House. And this is a group of 10 cabinet members on the way to theocracy here. And Mike Pence, led by a guy named Ralph Drollinger, who said that LGBTQ people are illegitimate. Them's fighting words, Ralph. He says there's no bar to a woman running a company or a cabinet department, but there is a prohibition on female leadership in marriage or the church. Among the attendees besides Pompeo are Betsy DeVos, Rick Perry, and Jeff Sessions, one of the few times he gets over to the White House when he's not being abused.
So they meet once a week, and they let this right-wing pastor lead them through verse after verse of the Bible, and they study and discuss what it all means. And his point of view, obviously, is a very LGBT exclusionary, condemnatory attitude that is what these cabinet secretaries are having drummed into them every week.
Jesus didn't say anything about it. Well,
Not that they don't already think this stuff.
What do they think about the Sermon on the Mount, that communistic Sermon on the Mount about treating everybody nice?
Please. And then another nominee, not as far as I know, in the Bible study group yet, but also controversial, is Sharon Fast Gustafson. She has been nominated to be the General Counsel of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Now, again, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has been a bastion of support for LGBT people for years now.
A leader on it, basically.
Absolutely, and in interpreting civil rights laws that ban sex discrimination as including trans people and sexual orientation. But she had a hearing this last week, Sharon Fast Gustafson, and she was asked by senators, I guess, about her attitude on interpreting federal laws to include sexual orientation and gender identity under sex discrimination. She refused to answer. She said, I think everybody should be treated fairly. Well, except that then you get to the Betsy DeVos definition, which is we're going to follow all federal laws, but doesn't interpret federal laws as including us.
And Jeff Sessions does the same thing. Let's see what else. Now, we don't talk a lot about the sex scandal in the White House here. You got enough of it there. But BuzzFeed did ask the White House press secretary, undersecretary this week, Lindsay Waters, if Trump believes sex work should be criminalized. And she wouldn't say. I refer you to the president's outside counsel. Well, who would that be at this point? And Mike
the guy without an office anymore?
Now,
that's a cute question.
You know, of course, the president just signed the big anti-trafficking bill today as we tape.
The FOSTA bill?
Yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, you and Gabe Gonzalez discussed that a couple of weeks ago when I was away. And
in the meantime, Backpage was shut down.
Yes, and we got a little blowback from viewers who felt that the two of you were not sufficiently cognizant of how the Backpage and other sites are sites for traffickers.
Totally, trafficking is a horrible thing, but I will tell you that in the criminal justice system now, it is being used to persecute almost any sex worker. They link them to trafficking, they get much heavier penalties, et cetera. We have to be very careful about this. I've seen it happen with clients at New Alternatives for Homeless LGBT Youth, where two of the clients are out there doing sex work, and one of them says, she trafficked me. Well, now she's going to go to jail for 30 years. It's be careful. Stop the trafficking, the genuine trafficking. And now some of our viewers are totally against sex work. I understand, and they say no, nobody does it because they want to.
Well, we went through the whole rent boy thing too, which I think is a lot more defensible as voluntary sex work. But let's not skip too quickly over the fact that that sex trafficking, child sex trafficking, exists and is horrible and is facilitated by these sites. Now, do you interrupt child sex trafficking by shutting down these sites, or is that just an easy way to go after it and claim you've done something instead of doing the work of actually finding the perpetrators?
We are in a time, whether you're talking about Facebook or Backpage or whatever, where these things are being misused by people, and the sites are going to be held responsible. And Backpage's solution to that was to shut down because there's so much liability out there now for some of these things. So things have to play out.
And I think you have to take that as an indication that there was a lot of child sex trafficking going on through that site.
But Donald Trump won't answer a question about sex work when he offered to pay the Playboy model Karen McDougal after their first encounter. She was very offended.
He's in a complicated position. All right. Thank you to the American Medical Association, which has weighed in on the question of transgender people serving in the armed forces, says there is no medically valid reason that trans troops should not be allowed to serve. Strange announcement from Homeland Security, which is compiling a list of all journalists and media influencers. Their benign explanation, as Andy explained to me, is
that every organization makes a press list of people that they want to reach with their messages. But the people saw this as totally nefarious. Maybe it is.
It struck me as an attempt to register all journalists. It's one thing to compile.
GayUSATV.org.
Yes, please.
We're here.
Send us your releases.
Get used to it.
Yeah. But the good news comes from the United States Census, which is refining its questions on the 2020 census to better capture same-sex couples. They have since 1990 had questions and analysis of the census that look at
same-sex partners.
Same-sex partners living together is the way they would capture people. You would report yourself as a head of household. You would report another adult in the household. You would be asked what your relationship was. If you said unmarried partner, for instance, then they'd look at the gender of each person and decide, okay, that's a same-sex couple.
And of course, by 2010, you had same-sex married couples in America.
Again, you would report as married. You'd look at the gender of the two people and figure it out.
They said somehow the majority of those same-sex couples were recorded as opposite-sex couples in the Social Security files. So the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing over there.
Yeah, a little cognitive dissonance, I think.
You know, here's the thing. I mean, the head of household is supposed to fill this out and then say how they're related to everybody else. So now they're going to have separate categories for opposite sex and same-sex spouses. You will see this on your census form, and for unmarried partners. And they're calling that as a backstop against the misreporting that went on before.
Or the misreading of the accurate reporting.
Yes, but you know, previously the choices were of husband/wife or unmarried partner. Now then there's the problem of the kid categories, because it only asks about biological son or daughter and adopted son or daughter. But if you are the spouse of a same-sex partner and you had the kid together, you're not you're not the biological parent necessarily.
No, but you can be.
But you are But you are the parent. You are not the adopted parent either.
No, but you can be the official parent.
But not biological. It uses the word biological or adopted.
Well, that's going to screw up a lot of straight couples with kids too, because
it's inadequate.
Yeah.
Get your act together. You've had 10 years.
I'm just happy that in the Trump administration, there are still sensible people who are trying to figure this stuff out.
Well,
instead of trying to make us disappear, as they're doing in so many other parts of the government data.
He's very busy. He's got a war in Syria. Now, then there's we don't know how this good thing happened, but the new Medicare cards to 44 million Americans, they're issuing new cards without your Social Security number on them. That's the big deal.
Yes, they're giving everybody a new individual identifying number.
But it's also not going to require gender markers. And a survey of 28,000 trans
elders
people found that a third who showed an ID with a name or gender marker that did not match their gender presentation were verbally harassed, denied benefits or service, asked to leave, or assaulted.
Exactly.
This is what happens when,
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, in Puerto Rico, a federal court has ordered that the government there provide accurate birth certificates for trans people in their lived gender identity. That's a good thing.
Let's see how you feel about this. The National Coalition for Men is suing over the fact that we have a male-only draft registration in this country, and a federal judge ruled this week that suit can go forward. They haven't drafted anybody since the Vietnam War, but the last time that a male-only draft was upheld was in 1981, and that was a 6-3 vote.
It seems like a kind of theoretical discussion, but one way.
Are you kidding? With what we're going into now?
That's
true.
true.
Get your kids ready, folks.
Yeah. Well, look, if they try to reinstitute a draft, forget it. War is over. But what they are doing in another sneaky attempt to keep trans people out of the military is when you apply for the military, they're now screwing around with what was your birth gender and trying to classify you that way.
Can you say don't know?
I wasn't
there.
I was very young at the time. I don't know, but they aren't giving up. The right wing does not give up.
And they haven't given up on persecuting gay people and immigrants. The National Immigration Law Center is suing to get a dreamer named Marco Garibay, 34. He's been in the United States, a dreamer. He's been in the United States since he was 6 years old. He is now married to a man here, but he's trapped in Mexico because he visited, I guess. And he left on the promise of getting a green card, and now they want to keep him out of the country and away from his husband. It's outrageous.
He's suing to get back in. Back to trans news. We told you some months ago about a case of a trans woman who was suing for employment discrimination in Texas. Well, the court, interestingly, has rejected her case as not being fully proved as discrimination, but said in the decision that, in fact, federal law against sex discrimination would cover trans people in employment.
Yeah, it's very strange because the judge went that far. I'm not giving you your case, but I'm saying this would be wrong.
The judge certainly didn't have to say anything about that, but decided to help establish that principle in law.
And it's the first such ruling in Texas, and Texas is very large.
And there is an organization called What We Know that is an LGBT research organization. They have hooked up with Cornell University, and they have just presented to Cornell and are publishing a compilation of all research done on trans people and trans issues. You can find this on the website of Cornell, whatweknow.inequality.cornell.edu. There it is on the screen. It is, or maybe if you just Google transgender research, it's a collaboration between the What We Know project and the Cornell Center for the Study of Inequality. Great to have a resource like that.
Let's talk about state and local legislation. We're coming to the end of legislative session. Some of the legislatures have already retired for the season.
Okay.
But so far, none of the 120 anti-LGBT bills in state legislatures has passed entirely and been enacted. Although some of them are working, some of them are on their way to be. A bunch of them passed last year, so something's going on in this country. I don't know if it's that they feel the blue wave coming, or that they're chastened by what happened to states that passed anti-LGBT legislation.
Or maybe they're just getting smarter.
Well,
there are
anyway.
a couple of things in the works that sound good. In Illinois, they are considering legislation to mandate an LGBT curriculum in high schools.
Yep.
California, I think, is the only other state that has done that. Why hasn't New York done it? It's time to teach our history and facts.
Yeah, come on, Governor Cuomo. It's an election year and you're running against an unqualified lesbian.
Exactly. In Hawaii, the legislature has passed a no conversion therapy for minors bill. They're reconciling a few details between the two houses, and then it will go to the governor.
California passed a resolution in the Assembly apologizing for the past persecution of LGBT people.
Nice.
No dollar figure attached to this.
No.
But, well.
No, but they're apologizing for bad laws and practices, persecution, oppression. It goes to the Senate in California now, but we have no reason to believe it won't pass there.
Okay.
And as long as we're talking about legislation and legislators, let's mourn the death of Hawaii's Senator Daniel Akaka, who was a great friend to the LGBT community.
Absolutely.
Including being one of the few senators, I think there are only 17 of them,
Fewer, I think.
who voted against the Defense of Marriage Act in 1996.
That's true.
Yeah.
He also voted for our civil rights. He had 100% ratings from the Human Rights Campaign. He was 93 years old, a longtime supporter, and World War II vet.
Now, not so supportive is a TV and radio commentator in St. Louis, Missouri at, you will not be surprised to hear, a Sinclair-owned TV station.
This guy's name is Jamie Ullman. And so...
He has resigned. There he is on the left.
Well, he tweeted, I've been hanging out, getting ready to ram a hot poker up David Hogg's ass tomorrow. Oh, that's very nice. His show was canceled by the TV station, not necessarily by the radio station where he works.
No, I think he's off the air in both.
This is Trump's favorite broadcast group, and he wants to have the FCC give them approval for acquiring the Tribune's 42 stations.
Well, they've been trying to do that for a long time. It's very controversial, and the fact that Sinclair got caught last week mandating that the anchors at all its stations read this statement about fake news.
But if the FCC is run by Trumpites, they'll just do what the hell they want to do.
It's certainly possible.
They got rid of net neutrality.
Yeah, it's true.
Or, you know.
That's true. All right, I'll stop being a Pollyanna.
Okay.
In Mississippi, the Supreme Court there has reversed a lower court. The Supreme Court says that a lesbian couple are divorcing, and they have a child, and the
6 years old,
son, and the non-biological mother was suing to be recognized as a parent of the child. The lower court said no, but the Supreme Court says yes, of course she's a parent.
Well, they wanted to give rights. The lower court wanted to give rights to the sperm donor, the anonymous sperm donor.
Now, keep in mind, if you are a biological absolutist or originalist, that straight couples who adopt a child or have alternative insemination to bear a child, the married couple are the parents on the birth certificate, no matter how this child was conceived.
That's right. Prince Harry is the son of Charles and Diana because they were married to each other. No, seriously.
Exactly.
That is how the law works.
Yes. So it should work the same for same-sex couples. And the Mississippi Supreme Court has now declared that that is so.
However, she now has to go back to the same bad judge to get the visitation stuff worked out.
Yeah, well, then
Good luck. If he's a Roy Moore type.
Yeah.
she's in trouble.
The Minneapolis schools, public schools, have announced that trans students can list their lived gender on all their official papers, can designate their gender.
Okay. There's a new study out about, we already knew that lesbian and bisexual girls were twice as likely to have teen pregnancy. Twice as likely.
Yes.
We knew that. But the new study looked into the reasons, and they attributed to childhood maltreatment, bullying, both as perpetrators and victims, and to prove to the bullies that they're heterosexual.
Exactly. And not use birth control to reinforce that idea.
Boston Marathon is going to allow trans runners to compete under their correct gender identity.
Yeah, so I had that in entertainment news.
Oh, well,
I will move that.
I think it's a civil rights breakthrough.
In Miami, Florida, they just held their annual Pride Parade in April because it's too hot in June, I guess. And a couple of guys were at the parade, and they went to a restroom nearby, and they came out of the restroom and they got attacked by
These two guys.
These are the guys who were attacked, the gay people who were attacked.
4 guys attacked them.
And
cowardly.
Have now turned themselves in.
Because their pictures were all over the news.
There's actually some video of this,
Yes.
about 12 seconds of video. It was a little too hard for us to capture, to show. But what it shows is that the perpetrators are beating the hell out of these guys, and these guys are not reacting. They're not, trying to engage in a fight.
They were holding hands at the time,
Yeah.
the guys, and this is obviously what set these guys off. And, there was a video produced with a guy with a Scottish accent. It's called Time for Love, about holding hands in public, about kissing your boyfriend or same-sex partner, rather, goodbye in a park. And I'm going to include it in our email this week because it's quite touching. It's only about 4 minutes long. We're not going to show it here. Also, with the accent, it's a little hard to understand. No, it's fine. It's good. You'll understand it, certainly. And, it's a really sweet thing. And but sign up for our email list by going to our website, www.gayusatv.org, and you'll get these web bonus extras.
I don't think you have to say www anymore.
I guess not.
gayusatv.org. And congratulations to Ronan Farrow, the New Yorker writer, who was being honored at a Point Foundation dinner. The Point Foundation gives college scholarships to LGBT people. And Ronan mentioned quite matter-of-factly that he was a member of the LGBTQ community.
Didn't say what category he falls into.
No, he's said or been talked about in the past as dating both men and women.
He was very evasive about it. He was one of these people who just said, I don't want to talk about
labels.
it. I don't want to talk about it.
But he was quite forthright in declaring himself a member of the community.
He's been a little evasive about his parentage.
And he talked about the support he's gotten from the community in all the writing he's done about Harvey Weinstein and a claim he's gotten for that. So congratulations to him. There's a debate online about whether he's been out or not, but at least he's said it.
We
now.
welcome everyone.
All right. Can we move on to international news? In Chile, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights is pushing them to fulfill their 2016 promise to legalize same-sex marriage. In Taiwan, the right wing there is proposing a public referendum on same-sex marriage to circumvent the court order that the government must institute and legalize same-sex marriage by May of 2019.
Right. I mean, they've been dragging their feet on this because they have an election this year, and they don't want to commit to it.
Well, the right wing is trying to take advantage of that, but the court order stands, and a year from now, within a year, maybe sooner, there should be same-sex marriage in Taiwan.
But the Central Election Commission in Taiwan has to decide on the measure, and they will not let the LGBT groups participate in the hearings about how they're going to phrase this, what they're going to do, whether they are going to do it, we shouldn't be voting on these things.
Such a familiar story.
Well, yes, we went through this a lot in the United States. The only place we didn't was in the District of Columbia, where they have a law or a constitutional thing, a charter thing, against voting on civil rights.
And even that was a fight. In New Zealand, the parliament has passed a bill that men convicted of homosexual behavior before 1986, when it was decriminalized, can clear their criminal records. In fact, if they are now dead, their families can apply to clear their records. And the Justice Minister apologized to those who had been convicted.
By the way, back to Chile for a second. Trans activist Daniela Vega, of A Fantastic Woman, which won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film, is asking to meet with Cardinal Izatti the Catholic cardinal, over his opposition to transgender rights.
Take advantage of your moment, Daniela.
Yes.
In Russia, Human Rights Watch points out that it has been 1 year with no investigation of the gay purge and torture of gay men in Chechnya.
Let's go to Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay.
Where a verdict is imminent in the challenge to the anti-buggery law.
Yes.
That's the name of it. The lawsuit was brought by a guy named Jason Jones, an LGBT activist there.
We have a picture of Jason. There he is.
Here's the thing. One of the reasons he's doing this is because they actually increased the penalties for sodomy in 1986, after not long after, but after they had not ceased being a colonial possession.
Most of these laws in places like this, in the Caribbean and Africa, are the results of British rule, imposed by British rule. But as you say, in Trinidad and Tobago, even after the British rule was ended, they increased penalties.
So hundreds of people marched to keep the law at the port of Spain there.
The sodomy law.
And they said that God's wrath would be visited upon the land if the law is struck down. So there were 150 people at a subsequent counter-demonstration, and we have some video from Trinidad and Tobago on that.
Gay pride flags being waved outside the parliament as those in support of the removal of the buggery law came out in their numbers to let their voices be heard. The action comes days after religious groups marched through the capital to keep the law on the books. In 3 days, the High Court will decide whether the law should remain after it was challenged by Trinidadian gay rights activist Jason Jones. The crowd outside the parliament found fresh ways to get the attention of members of parliament as they made their way into the building. Head of the coalition advocating for inclusion of sexual orientation, Colin Robinson, says those protesting were an amalgamation of activist groups. He added that citizens should have the right to choose.
Despite what people have been marching in the street and saying over the past month, that we all have to share the nation, no matter how small a group we might be, no matter how large the population of evangelical Christians may be in Trinidad and Tobago, we all have to share the nation.
Even this door came out to support the protests. Supporting the cause, comedian and radio announcer Nikki Crosby says her reason for supporting the removal of the law is simply that citizens have the right to privacy. She rejected the claims that the law will target children.
This is about respect, and that's what we're losing in our society. I totally understand the Christian views, but they alone don't live in Trinidad and Tobago. So we have to respect every single person. And people tying up this with children, and if children are raped, we have laws for that. That is a whole different issue. That is child rape. That is children being protected under certain laws.
Former Minister and Senator Verna St. Rose also came to support. Another group in support of the Law Women's Caucus of TNT, led by Sharon Motley, says this protest has motivated the community to come out.
This is an incredible moment in Trinidad and Tobago's history. And this is not the first of its kind, but this is important. This is a landmark response, because what we're saying is that we're no longer in the closet. We will not be stepped on. We will not be discriminated against. We will stand up against fear and violence.
And there among the crowd was one man calling for the law to remain. Otto Carrington, CNC3 News.
So we should know about this next week. Now, the first...
It's going to happen. We're taping on Wednesday. The decision is due tomorrow.
Right.
So it may have happened by the time you see this.
The first spokesperson there, the male spokesperson, was Colin Robinson from the coalition advocating for inclusion of sexual orientation, an old colleague of ours in the AIDS movement and the LGBT movement in New York. He initially was not crazy about this case because he said he felt the movement should focus on sexual orientation, non-discrimination, and transgender. But the case is there, and people were marching against, so we marched for.
It's great to see the movement there. And in equally dangerous territory, and maybe more so, in Swaziland in Africa, just north of South Africa, activists have applied to hold their first Pride March and Festival in June.
There's a picture of the activist who's trying to put it together, or the spokesperson for a group called Rock of Hope, Malusi Simlane. He said, "We cannot hide forever. We cannot do advocacy if we are not visible." However, they're up against, this is a monarchy. It's an absolute monarchy run by King Mswati III, who calls homosexuality satanic, and the Prime Minister doesn't like it either.
There's still an enormous amount of violence against LGBT people, a lot of corrective rape of lesbians.
There are no LGBT gathering places, so I would say that Mr. Similani, these are some of the bravest LGBT people in the world.
No question. And so they've submitted this application for permission for a parade and festival. Hard to imagine they're going to get that.
They want to do it in the last week of June, just like we do.
We'll keep an eye on that.
In the city of Mbabne.
In France, the parliament is considering increasing asylum chances for LGBT people from countries where they are not safe. Their asylum laws have been pretty restrictive, but this may loosen them up.
So this would take off the safe list India, Ghana, and Senegal, and so that would make it easier if you were from there to get because otherwise it's easier to send you back. You can't appeal, so that's some progress there.
In Melbourne, Australia, a gay man who was beaten by 3 men outside a gay bar.
I have a picture of him. We don't have his identity, but he was at the press conferences.
But they're now holding press conferences because they're seeking witnesses to this attack.
Well, 3 guys. He got a fractured skull. They called him an effing faggot, and they beat him unconscious on January 27th. This was. He says he does not see himself as a minority. Well, they do. And he says, I don't want people to look at this and think they need to stay home and hide from this. I think people should go out and enjoy life. Well,
and let's say again, this is Melbourne, Australia.
Yeah.
This is not
Swaziland.
Exactly. In Brazil, 5 men have been sentenced to a total of 83 years in prison, from 14 to 21 years for each of them, for the brutal torture and murder of a trans woman, Dandara dos Santos. This was captured on video. It became quite a cause célèbre around the world because it was so overt. They hit her with boards and rocks and...
Look, things are very, very tough.
Eventually shot her.
Very tough in Brazil. I mean, of course, in Rio, we told you about the assassination of the out lesbian city council member, Marielle Franco, just a couple of weeks ago. The city's municipal coordinator for sexual diversity there, Nelio Giorgini da Silva, was shot at as he left a restaurant with his husband and his parents. And the shots didn't hit the car. But Brazil is a mess. I mean, they've just locked up Lula, the former leftist president, and 35 trans people have been murdered there this year. So, tough.
Not that we're not aware of all the horrible things happening here, too.
That's true.
Yeah.
All right.
So a couple of pieces of small good news. In the UK, Eddie Izzard, longtime famous comedian and self-described straight transvestite, has been elected to the Labour Party governing board.
That's exactly right. He says, I'm not wearing women's clothes, I'm wearing clothes. He says he took a lot of hate for being gender nonconforming, and people referred to him as that. And then he says, if I can deal with that, then politics is easy.
And congratulations to Venezuelan Olympic diver Robert Paez, who has come out in an interview with Outsports magazine. Paez was in the Olympics in 2012 and 2016. And that is a terrific picture.
In Costa Rica, 109 people have signed up for gender and name change ID cards, and 7 same-sex couples have applied to register their marriages, but the government's still dragging their tails on getting all this implemented.
All right, AIDS news?
Yes.
You got something else there?
Well, I'm sorry to see what's also happening in Hungary and the right-wing stretches.
Your people.
Well, Romania really, but you know.
Okay. Sorry.
Anyway, they're pretty bad too.
Fairly good news from Missouri. We have followed the case for some time of Michael Johnson, who was a college student and also a wrestler known as Tiger Mandingo, which is cute until you realize that that really was used against him. He was sentenced originally to 30 years in prison for being HIV positive and having sex without supposedly disclosing his HIV status.
Well, I mean, they actually convicted him of infecting other people, is the way way it went at trial. But you know, who knows?
But his original conviction was overturned for prosecutorial misconduct because they didn't hand over enough information in a timely fashion.
Right.
And then he agreed to a plea bargain for a 10-year sentence. Well, now he has been, at the trial, the prosecutors were saying things like, look at his big penis. And don't you think people are gay by choice?
No, it was a horrible, horrible homophobic thing.
Awful.
We owe a lot to out-gay journalist Stephen Thrasher for being on this case for BuzzFeed from the very beginning, going down to Missouri there and covering it.
So the good news is that Michael has now been given a parole date. It's not for another year and a half, but it is a significant cut in his sentence. There are a lot of people who think he should never have been in prison in the first place, but he now has an October 2019 date to look forward to for release.
The New York State Assembly is going to have hearings on aid in dying, medical aid in dying, on April 23rd in Albany and May 3rd in New York City. In the Health Committee, again, this is one of those things that might get through the Assembly in New York, but we can't get things through the Senate. And I think we really talked about what's going on in New York. The governor claims to have reached a deal to bring all the Democrats together to be as one in the Senate, but it's a very untrustworthy thing.
Some years ago, the New York State Legislature wound up on a list of rating the states around the country. New York's was worst.
The most dysfunctional.
Yes.
Because we have Democrats here who caucus with Republicans to keep Republicans in power because they're getting their money from real estate interests that want to keep Republicans in power. And the governor, as a year ago, said, I don't think it's necessarily such a bad thing having divided government in New York. The leader of the Democratic Party in New York who wants to be reelected as governor and maybe run for your president, forget about it.
So, under threat of primary opponents like Cynthia Nixon this year, Cuomo is suddenly doing an about-face and brokered what is supposedly this deal.
Yes.
To get the the breakaway Senate Democrats back with the main body of Democrats.
Yes.
We don't trust it.
Well, not only do we not trust it, at the deal, the governor said, we're dissolving the Independent Democratic Caucus. What are they doing this week? They're having a fundraiser for the Independent Democratic Caucus, which the governor is sponsoring. I mean, it's a joke.
Terrible.
New York. You think it's a liberal place. You're wrong.
New Yorkers, please don't buy this deal and realize that we still have to replace these independent Democratic conference people with actual Democrats.
All right, we have a bunch of entertainment news.
We do.
Maybe we should get to it.
Go right ahead.
Hey, at the Olivier Awards in London, most of them went to Hamilton, but Anne's favorite, Denise Goff, who's in Angels in America here in New York, won for Best Supporting Actress, and Angels won for Best Revival of a Play. And again, you can see that in New York. Of course, it's going to be up against 3 tall women for the Tonys. What do you think?
I think it's going to be a fight to the death. No, Denise Goff is wonderful
As
in
Harper.
Angels in America. She just leapt off that stage to me, and I'm thrilled to hear she won Best Supporting Actress. That was exactly what I was hoping would happen.
Yes. Okay.
Let's see if she can do that at the Tonys too.
And there are two shows at the Theater for the Theater for the New City in New York that are of interest. Barbara Kahn has a new play. She writes a lot about LGBT themes. This one's called Verzet Amsterdam, about the Dutch resistance in World War II by artists. And some of them were gay, and they resisted fascism and protected Jews, and that's running till April 22nd. And Charles Busch is back with something called The Confession of Lily Dare, a comic melodrama, to April 29th.
Both of those at the Theater for the New City. In Operaland, there is an opera called As One that was written in 2014. It's about trans issues, and it got great reviews. It has continued to be produced here and there. And this year it's headed to Cincinnati and the Brooklyn Academy of Music. So you might want to check this out, As One, in Cincinnati and Brooklyn.
You wouldn't know this from reading the New York Times, but the unique jazz pianist Cecil Taylor, who died at 89, a very radical performance art performer, was gay. And was persecuted for it throughout his career, especially by other jazz artists, by venues, etc. He was asked if he was gay once, and he said, do you think a three-letter word defines the complexity of my humanity? I avoid the trap of easy definition, but you were ostracized for it anyway. And but anyway, he was brought to my Catholic boys' high school to perform in 1969, I think. It was, it was unbelievable having this guy going up there, and we're all sitting there like these white kids going, what the hell is that? But it was something. It opened I think that they felt they had to open up things in those days because it was the 60s.
Well, and another current case of someone talking with more openness and complexity about her sexuality, Abby Jacobson, a very popular actress of the series Broad City, and also appearing in a new Netflix movie, Six Balloons, which is a much more serious production. So she was interviewed by Vanity Fair, and they said, so how's your love life these days? And she says, well, actually, I date men and women, and went on about that, and that evidently was a revelation.
That's the old Woody Allen joke. If you're bisexual, you have twice as much chance of a date on Saturday night. Abby, however, says, if you want to date me, you have to be funny, and you have to love what you do. That's good advice for anybody.
There's a new album out of a compilation of different singers. It's called Universal Love, and it's everyone from Bob Dylan to Kesha, St. Vincent, others. And the deal is that they took songs and they turned them into same-sex love songs. And I thought, why do you need to change pronouns in songs? Why not just take, why can't a woman sing My Girl or similarly?
As they do in Broadway backwards.
We'll get to that.
Maybe.
I think we will get to
Maybe.
that. But it seemed to me a little too tortured to be having to change the pronouns in songs to get to the same-sex construct.
Now, culturally, we hear all the time about the demise of gay bars, but Boxers, which has locations in New York and Chelsea's Hell's Kitchen and the Upper East Side, is opening one in Washington Heights at Broadway and 158th Street. This is not a commercial for them, but it's an area that without gay bars, it's obviously changing as time goes by, and there it is.
I saw a movie that's being released next week by Wolf Video. Wolf Video is a great place to find LGBT content movies, and this is coming out on DVD and video on demand. Russian Doll. It's sort of a thriller mystery about a lesbian detective. It's a little... It's not the greatest thing I've ever seen, but it's if you're looking for lesbian content, Wolf Video is a great thing to check out.
Rapper Jay-Z was on that new David Letterman interview show talking about his mother, Gloria Carter, being a lesbian and how they both sang about it on on his album 444. But he told David, I imagine having to live your life as someone else, and you think you're protecting your kids. He was lamenting this, because that's the way he was brought up. And he says he cried when they finally talked about it.
I think we have time for your little ditty.
Why don't we? I go to the Broadway Backwards benefit for Broadway Cares, Equity Fights AIDS, and for the Center of New York, where, again, men sing. So in this case, the leads of Dear Evan Hansen, Taylor Trench, and the lead of Aladdin, Telly Leung, both out gay, sang the love song from Sideshow, a Broadway show from a couple of years ago, Who Will Love Me As I Am? And let's give you a flavor of it.
Like a fish plucked from the ocean, tossed into a foreign stream. Always knew that I was different, often fled into a dream. I ignored the raging current, right against the tide I swam. But I floated with a question, who will love me as I am?
Like an odd, exotic creature on display inside a zoo. Hearing children asking questions makes me ask some questions too. Could we bend the laws of nature? Could a lion love a lamb? Who will see beyond the surface? Who will love me as I am? Who will ever call to say I love you? Send me flowers or a telegram. Who could proudly stand beside me? Who will love me as I am? Like a clown whose tears cause laughter, trapped inside the center ring.
Even seeing smiling faces, I am lonely pondering. Who would want to join this madness? Who would change my monogram? Who will be part of my circus? Who will love me as I am? Who will ever call to say I love you? Send me flowers or a telegram. Who could proudly stand beside me? Who will love me as I am? Who could proudly stand beside me? Who will love me as I
They'll love you if you're funny and if you like what you do. Okay. Wonderful show. Once a year, Broadway Backwards. A couple of other notes. Roseanne Barr called out New York and LA for giving her worst ratings and for not supporting, quote, a gender-fluid child character and a Hillary supporting sister character.
I have been watching the show. They have not brought that kid back on in the last 2 episodes. And, I love the original Roseanne. I think this is a very pale version. It's just not well written, not well acted, not well whatever.
Okay. Any other news?
That's my opinion. Yes, the Louisiana State Senate has outlawed sex with animals by a vote of 25 to 10. And the 10 who didn't want to outlaw it were Republicans.
And next week, our co-host will be Blanche Wiesen-Cook, and we're going to have Aine Gordon on, who's the author of a play about...
We're over time. Bye.
APA. Bye.
See you eventually.
Get our email, please.